Hi, and welcome to the channel Biblical Mysteries. My name is Dr. Rich Sorensen, and I'm your host for this channel. And in this video, we will consider two questions. Number one, is the Bible myth? And two, is the Bible compatible with science? And as we proceed with this topic, I'll be referring to many resources that you may want to check out for yourself. And this video is based on papers I've written, which footnote the references, and so there are links to the papers in the description box. Now, ancient history is fascinating as it reveals the roots of humanity, what our nature is, where we came from, how we lived, and potentially how we should live. But much of ancient history is considered to be hagiographic, or in other words, part history and maybe part myth. And since the secularization of Western society and the domination of public education by the government, the Bible has been increasingly viewed as ancient myth, which had nothing to do with contemporary society. And this view has accelerated due to the acceptance by many of Darwinism as the explanation for human origins. Have humans been around for millions of years? And did we come from grunting cavemen, as in the movie Quest for Fire, who evolved from apes and had no intrinsic morality or higher intellect, those attributes being somehow developed over millennia? Or were we created by God and were possibly more intelligent at the beginning than we are now? Likewise, did the oldest human societies gradually develop from hunter-gatherer tribes of limited intelligence that we would consider to be Neanderthal in the negative or the colloquial sense of that word? And did human intelligence evolve? Or was the level of intellect of ancient peoples around the same as it is now? Now note that we are differentiating here between evolution and Darwinism. Evolution is defined as changes in a population of organisms, and they're brought about by evolutionary factors: time, chance, mutations, changes in the environment, and survival of the fittest. Whereas Darwinism is defined as universal common descent, where all living things supposedly descended from ancient bacteria, which in turn were accidentally generated from non-living elements, and with no higher intelligence involved. Humans, like all organisms, have evolved over the centuries. For example, we've gotten taller and stronger as diets and lifestyles have improved, which is evolution at work. However, the evolution of human intellect is problematic, because intellect is not necessarily a characteristic employed in mate selection, which is a key factor in survival and the propagation of the next generation. Males generally value youth and beauty in females, and females generally value strength and security in males, so that the degree of intelligence in a potential mate, assuming that you could even assess it, seems to be a more tenuous element. At least one study unsurprisingly suggests that a major selection factor for relationships is masculinity in men and femininity in women. Therefore, the difference between contemporary and ancient peoples probably does not lie in the evolution of raw human intellect. Rather, it lies in their living conditions and societal organizations. Now, ordinary people in ancient times were much more focused on mere survival, and they had little time or energy for anything else. And survival mode was perpetuated by conflict and by the lack of technology, but even more so by the hierarchical and militant organizations of many ancient societies that precluded individual initiative, limited educational opportunities, and stressed absolute obedience to the ruler. And so that in turn mitigated against inventiveness in the development of technology, which is probably why it's so many centuries before technology was improved. For example, ancient rulers and people of wealth had many servants to care for them. So in that era, there was little incentive to develop labor-saving devices that we use all the time today. Therefore, we acknowledge that evolution is a biological fact, whereas Darwinism, the belief that everything developed from primordial substance, is fiction. Now, this may immediately raise the hackles of those who have been trained by our postmodern society and public education system to think that science is all important and that the Bible is unscientific myth. However, as we shall see, the Bible is very scientific, and the elevation of science to the position of deity in our culture is a serious mistake. Because science can tell us how to do many things, but it cannot tell us what ought to be done. It is incapable of answering why questions, and it cannot provide any secure basis for ethics and morality, which are essential elements of human society. Nevertheless, the creationist approach is far from being popular, as Darwinism and the companion religion of naturalism and humanism is what is generally taught in public schools, due to the legislated separation of church and state. So it's important to understand how naturalism is defined. And here's a definition. Naturalism encompasses all that exists throughout space and time. The cosmos consists only of natural elements and physical substance, mass, and energy. Non-physical or quasi-physical substances, such as information, ideas, values, logic, mathematics, intellect, and similar things, can be reduced to a physical cause. Nature operates by the laws of physics, and in principle can be explained and understood by science and philosophy. The supernatural does not exist. Only nature is real. So spirits, deities, and ghosts are not real, and there is no quote-unquote purpose in nature. The cosmos is all that there ever was, all there ever is, and all that there ever will be. Now, the philosophy of the West, which accompanies naturalism and humanism, is postmodernism. And that is a philosophy where truth and morality are mutable, they're changeable, and essentially self-defined. So here's a definition of postmodernism. Postmodernism is a conviction that it's no longer possible to rely upon previous ways of depicting the world. Postmodern proponents align themselves with feminism, multiculturalism, post-colonialism, all these isms, and identity politics. Postmodern thought defines itself by the rejection of any single foundational historical narrative, such as Christianity, the rejection of any divine moral order, and calling into question the legitimacy of the Enlightenment account of progress and rationality. Now, much of the current direction of culture and archaeology is thus to reject the Bible and its historicity. However, biblical creationism is a perspective that makes the most sense, especially when we ponder the questions of how our intense aspirations for love, care, and justice could have originated. If we are merely collections of stray molecules that formed on a cold rock, then where did these powerful emotions and desires come from? Then consider the human brain, which is the most complex object in the known universe. Could it have somehow developed by chance? Or was it instead created by an intelligent designer? Now, despite our advances in AI, such as ChatGPT, and movies of super intelligent robots, such as Terminator, iRobot, and Ex Machina, we still have no real clue as to how human consciousness works. That's probably a good thing, given the propensity of government to use advanced technology as control mechanisms. Now, Richard Dawkins, the well-known Darwinist, and others have stated a belief in what they refer to as Panspermia. That is the belief that an alien race somehow seeded our planet and was the origin of life on Earth. But that just puts the question back a step. How did the aliens come into being, and where did they come from? It's never been demonstrated that the evolution of life from inorganic chemicals has occurred, or that life has evolved from simple life forms to the complex ones we see today. Living systems, even the simplest ones, are based upon symbolic language structures of extreme complexity, in other words, DNA. And there's no hint in the laws of chemistry and physics that matter on its own can ever generate symbolic language, regardless of the time allowed. Because it has no solution to this fundamental difficulty, evolutionary dogma is now facing a major crisis that long periods of time simply cannot mend. Everything was therefore created by God, and he is the origin of love, caring, and justice. And so Darwinism is a contemporary myth. However, it is necessary to prop up the faith of atheists, and that's why it still continues. But as Romans 1:21 states, for since the creation of the world, his eternal attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. Now, the veracity of the Bible has been illustrated in many archaeological finds, and let me present to you a number of them. Number one, the site of Darwinism near Mount Ararat in Turkey, where ground-penetrating radar has identified a three-decked boat-like structure that may be the remains of Noah's Ark. Number two, the discovery of the sites of Sodom, Gomorrah, and the other cities of the plain that were destroyed back in Genesis. And these have been identified with current locations on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. The first four were never re-inhabited, that is Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboiim, after being destroyed by burning sulfur. And by the way, the area is still filled with sulfur balls. Whereas Zoar, which is the town to which Lot, who was Abraham's nephew in the story, ran to in order to escape the destruction of Sodom, biblical Zoar is currently the town of Saphi, and it's inhabited. And there is a cave in the mountains above Zoar, to which Lot and his wife, his daughters moved after the destruction, and that has also been identified. Number three, the pharaoh of the Exodus was very likely Amenhotep II from the 18th dynasty. His mummy has tubercles on his skin that were possibly caused by the plague of boils that was described in Exodus chapter 9. His oldest son, Webensenu, predeceased him and was buried in his father's tomb. Therefore, Webensenu was probably the firstborn son who died in the Passover, which is the final plague on the land of Egypt. The father of Amenhotep II was Thutmose III, who was one of the greatest of all of Egypt's pharaohs, and as a child he was co-regent with his aunt Hatshepsut, who ruled until he came of age. Hatshepsut may therefore have been the Egyptian princess who found the baby Moses in the Nile River. The Marineptah stele that was dated from around 1210 BC, which mentions the conquest of the people in Israel at the time of the Judges, the earliest mention of the nation of Israel outside the Bible. Hezekiah's tunnel and the attack on Judah by the Assyrian king Sennacherib, which is described in 2 Kings chapter 18 through 19, and that has been dramatically confirmed through archaeology. The excavations of Nineveh unearthed wall carvings of the siege of Lachish by the Assyrian army, and the siege works constructed by the Assyrian army at Lachish prior to destroying that city have all been excavated. When the Assyrians then tried to sack Jerusalem, a large number of soldiers suddenly died, and Sennacherib called off the attack, and he was assassinated after returning to Nineveh. So he never conquered Jerusalem, and there's never any record of him doing so, despite his many other conquests. The Lachish letters. These were written on ostraca, which are pottery scraps, in the time of Nebuchadnezzar's invasion of Judah. The Chaldean inscriptions. This was inscriptions identifying the house of David, which is the king of Israel. And the existence of David had been previously been questioned, but now it's obvious that David actually existed. Vessels used in the temple worship from the time of King Solomon have been discovered under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, along with a complex water supply and drainage system for the process of cleansing after sacrifices were offered. This confirms that the site was the location of Solomon's temple. The Moabite stone. This included a statement of Moab revolting against King Jehoram of the northern kingdom of Israel soon after the death of King Ahab. This stele also mentions the house of David. The Nabonidus cylinders. And for a long time, the biblical book of Daniel was considered to be fictional because it indicates that the last ruler of Babylon was Belshazzar, who was not mentioned in the king lists. But in 1954, the Nabonidus cuneiform cylinders were discovered, which indicated that Nabonidus, who was the last king of Babylon, was away from the city when it fell to the Persians, and that he had appointed his son Belshazzar to be regent in his place. The Pilate stone. There were no Roman records of Pontius Pilate being the Roman prefect of Judea at the time of Christ, so the biblical story of the trial of Christ before Pilate was questioned. But then the Pilate stone was discovered in 1961 in Caesarea, and it's a block of carved limestone with an inscription done by Pontius Pilate. And there have been a number of sites in Israel where secular archaeologists have denied the reality of the Bible, but which later have been confirmed as being exactly what the Bible accounts stated. These include the destruction of the city of Jericho, discussed in the book of Joshua chapter 6, and the Battle of Ai from the book of Joshua chapter 8, both of which took place around 1400 BC. The problem, and the reason that they were misidentified as not being biblical, was mistakes and wrong interpretations made by archaeologists such as Catherine Kenyon, Joseph Calloway, and others who denied the biblical accounts. Even more compelling is the Shroud of Turin, which allegedly was the burial shroud of Christ. It is the most studied artifact in history and has been dated to the time of Christ. Despite the efforts of many skeptics, the authenticity of the shroud has never been successfully challenged. So, the problem that secular archaeologists have with the Bible is primarily what has not been found. For example, since there's no evidence of Abraham or Moses that has been dug up, they are said by archaeologists to be fictional. And this, of course, is an argument from silence. In other words, a lack of archaeology supposedly equals a lack of existence. But it ignores the fact that since neither Abraham nor Moses created statues or stelae with inscriptions, it's unlikely that any archaeological evidence would ever be found. Perhaps a more serious challenge to a biblically based chronology is the discovery of ancient human-like remains, which have been carbon dated to thousands or even millions of years ago. But there have been many challenges to the interpretation of ancient fossils. For example, the claim that Lucy skeleton from Africa is the missing link has generally been debunked, as she was a type of ape. An equally serious challenge in the opposite direction is the problems with carbon dating of ancient organic material. Carbon dating is considered to be the most reliable tool that archaeologists can use in establishing dates, and it requires organic material. And it's based on the amount of radioactive isotope carbon-14 in the sample that is being tested relative to the amount of normal carbon, or carbon-12. But this dating method has a potentially fallacious assumption that the original amount of carbon-14 in the sample was the same as it is in contemporary organic material. Carbon-14 in nature is created by cosmic radiation and other forms of environmental pollution. In ancient times, the world was better protected and cleaner with lower amounts of radioactive carbon, so the dating of samples older than around 3500 BC is suspect. Nevertheless, in our day, there is a great resistance to anything supernatural, and a continual tendency to try and make religion scientific. Postmoderns have been inculcated with the philosophy of naturalism, as described above, so the Bible is said to be incompatible with science. Furthermore, scientists are thought to be impartial seekers of truth. Now, that assertion took a big hit from Thomas Kuhn's book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, in which he revealed that most science is actually not a search for truth. Rather, it is typically done as a form of confirmation bias. Most research is done to support what the scientist and or what his or her institution already knew and believed. And so scientists, just like everyone else, may thus become wedded to their pet theories and ideas and loath to give them up, especially if they've devoted their lives and their careers to these things, and even if they turn out to be wrong. And it's hard, as we know, to even imagine that our thinking could be incorrect and wrong, hence the extreme political divide in America. Furthermore, scientists can be just as mercenary as everyone else, Much current scientific research is now being sponsored by large organizations to help sell their products. This is typified by drug companies willing to slant the evidence, and like an American sugar group that hired Harvard scientists to convince the public that sugar is really not all that bad for us. So in our day, the equation that's often taught is that science equals good and religion equals bad. That science is intelligent and contemporary, and religion is backward and medieval. As our ancient ancestors did not fully understand the causes for disease and the scientific aspects of nature, they often ascribed disasters and mysterious events to the actions of the gods. But now we know better. The gods supposedly don't exist, and the supernatural is said to be an ancient myth. So we're able to fully rely upon science. Or are we? Even scientists now acknowledge the existence of the soul, although it's impossible to prove this one way or the other. In some near-death experiences, the people had flatlined, but they later reported seeing and hearing things that took place after their brain was technically dead. The Bible is likewise considered by many to be myth, but there's way too much evidence for the Bible's veracity and historicity to ignore it. So our culture is therefore in great danger of making the opposite error of our ancient ancestors. Rather than like what they did was to deify idols and statues, we deify science and the self. Postmodernism implies that you can become your own God and create your own morality and your own religion, and therefore it is a major factor in the degradation of Western society. Now, some physicists have posited that our universe has dimensions beyond the four that we know: length, width, height, and time. For example, superstring theory holds that there are 10 dimensions in which the additional 6 are possibly collapsed in minute quantum distances within the existing dimensions. If these additional dimensions are the realm of spirit beings, it would explain why they can appear and disappear at will. It could also explain how spirit beings may instantaneously move between regions in our universe, which are actually light years apart in our three-dimensional space. Therefore, what we now perceive is only a very small portion of reality, and we have no idea what the laws of science are that underlie all of this unknown complexity. And the laws of science, for example, the first law of thermodynamics, which is the conservation of matter and energy, are not necessarily universal. They are only universal laws in the sense that we have never observed exceptions to them in the physical world. However, if we were able to fully analyze and understand both physical and spiritual, we may discover that the laws of science we know can have exceptions, and or maybe they're only a small subset of a much larger and more fundamental set of laws. At the quantum level, which is a level of subatomic particles, like electrons and protons and so forth, we can't see what is actually happening, even in our realm of 4 dimensions. And we speak of electrons and protons as the building block of atoms, but just because we've given them names doesn't mean that we really understand them. What is a proton, and what is an electron, really? Now, we use electrons to generate electricity, and electron microscopes allow us to see the insides of cells more clearly. But how can we actually see an electron? Furthermore, we have difficulty even conceptualizing it. For example, why do subatomic particles sometimes behave like particles and other times like waves? How does gravity work? Why does time slow down as an object speeds up? In the words of the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Niels Bohr, everything we call real is made up of things that cannot be regarded as real. Thus, we are essentially clueless regarding any reality beyond our 4 dimensions, and we have no way of detecting or analyzing it, much less understanding or controlling it. A good analogy to this is the spectrum of light that's visible to us. In other words, the area of the electromagnetic spectrum that's above infrared and below ultraviolet. That is only a very tiny fraction of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, and that's all that we can see with our eyes. Our modern worldview, obsessed as it is with empirical science and human reason, is so blinded to its own ignorance of transcendent reality that it amounts to idolatry, in which we view the limited, fallible human mind and senses as God. Modern material descriptions of reality are therefore more false than the ancient pictures because they do not include the immaterial aspects of reality, meaning and purpose. But even more basic than that, human observation of the universe is always changing, from Newtonian physics to quantum physics to string theory. That change is essentially a change in ideas. What we think we see is more affected by our philosophical presuppositions and theories than empirical scientists are willing to admit. A proper response should be more humility and less hubris regarding the use of scientific models as standards in judging theological meaning and purpose. Now, quantum theory and quantum physics has shown us that the reality which we see and touch is vastly different at the atomic and subatomic levels. So contrary to the notion of atoms being solid balls of matter, they're actually mostly empty space. Someone used this analogy. If the nucleus of each atom is a fly on the pitcher's mound of a stadium, then the electrons surrounding the nucleus are minute gnats circling the stadium. Therefore, things that to us seem to be solid, such as the surface of a desk, are only so because we can only see and experience the world at the macro level. And in opposition to naturalism, the Bible often speaks of an unseen spiritual world. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And that's from 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Now this unseen realm, which according to the above text is actually more permanent and therefore more real and less flawed than the physical world, is inhabited by spirit beings, and they have the ability to interact with our physical world. Our bodies are composed of carbon-based compounds, whereas angels and demons may have a nature that's totally beyond our current physics and chemistry. What is spirit? What is it made of? Do all spirit beings have the same nature? And are our angels and demons all made up of the same stuff as God? We barely understand physical matter, and we have no clue at all as to how spirit is propagated, what it is composed of, and what its capabilities are. Therefore, we don't understand how a spirit-to-body transformation would work, and what the limitations are, if any. Nevertheless, the Bible records many instances where spirit beings assumed human, or at least visible form, and interacted with people. For example, Genesis 18 tells of a lengthy meeting between Abraham and several spirit beings who appeared to be human and who talked and even ate with him. Now, God is the ultimate astrophysicist, the ultimate biologist, biochemist, neuroscientist, physician, and psychologist, etc. And God is also the ultimate storyteller. Now, a human novelist will try to imagine and then write a story that will make the points that he or she wishes to make as subtly as possible in the context of the story, so that will eventually dawn on the reader what the novelist was trying to say. And God does the novelist one better. The Bible is constructed of stories and prophecies where the point is not only concealed, like a good novel, but the fulfillment of the story actually occurs in the future. Only God can do that. To a human novelist, that's impossible. And here are a few examples from the 300 plus Old Testament prophecies of Christ. Number 1, the seed of the woman who would crush Satan's head from Genesis 3, which is a prophecy of what Christ would eventually do at the end of time. And women don't have seeds, so this is a prefiguring of the virgin birth of Christ. Number 2, the Passover, which was the last plague on Egypt, which took place around 1500 BC, and is described in Exodus chapter 11 through 12. The people of Israel were told to kill and eat an unblemished male lamb, sprinkle the blood over the doorpost of their houses, and then be ready to leave Egypt, the land where they had been enslaved. From that time, throughout the centuries, and even down to the present, Jews have celebrated the Passover, which takes place in April, just before Easter. Now, when Jesus was eating the Last Supper with the disciples, which was a Passover dinner, he explained that the unleavened Passover bread represented his body that would be broken for them. Leaven is a biblical symbol of sin, and the cups of wine represented his blood that would be shed for them. Thus, he stated that the Passover, which took place 1,500 years previously, was all about him and all about his ministry, which would release people from enslavement to sin, just as the Israelites were released from physical slavery in Egypt. Example number 3, the poisonous snakes who bit the Israelites after they complained in the wilderness. This took place around 1500 BC and is described in Numbers chapter 21. Moses was instructed by God to cast a bronze snake mounted on a pole, and everyone who had been bitten could then look to the snake on the pole, and they would live. Now, nothing more is said about this strange event until Jesus explains its significance in John chapter 3. And he says, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And the Apostle Paul further explains this. He says, for our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And so the image of the snake on the pole later became the symbol of the medical profession, as we know. Example number 4. David's prophecy of the Messiah around 1000 BC from Psalm 22. Here's some of the contents of that psalm. God would forsake him in death. He would be mocked. Enemies would surround him. They would cast lots for his clothes, and his hands and feet would be pierced. And all of this took place at the crucifixion of Jesus. And the final example, number 5. Isaiah's prophecies of the Messiah around 700 BC from Isaiah chapter 53. Isaiah says that he had no form that we should especially admire him. He would be a man of sorrows. He would be despised and rejected. He wouldn't complain in the face of intense suffering. He would be crushed for the atonement of sin and the benefit of everyone. He would die surrounded by bad people. At death, he would be taken by a wealthy man. And so all of this was characteristic of and what happened to Jesus at his crucifixion. Now, for anyone who doubts that science and the Bible are compatible, here are some quotes from scientists about God and the Bible. Sir Derek Barton. God is truth. There is no incompatibility between science and religion. Both are seeking the same truth. Science shows that God exists. Alexis Carroll. Jesus knows our world. He does not disdain us like the God of Aristotle. We can speak to him and he answers us. Although he is a person like ourselves, he is God and transcends all things. Arthur Compton. For myself, faith begins with a realization that a supreme intelligence brought the universe into being and created man. It is not difficult for me to have this faith, for it is incontrovertible that where there is a plan, there is intelligence. An orderly, unfolding universe testifies to the truth of the most majestic statement ever uttered. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Paul Dirac. God is a mathematician of a very high order, and he used advanced mathematics in constructing the universe. Albert Einstein. This is from an interview with the Saturday Evening Post. You accept the historical Jesus? Unquestionably, no one can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is ever filled with such life. Antony Flew. It now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided material for a new and enormously powerful argument for design. Owen Gingrich. Nevertheless, just as I believe that the book of Scripture illuminates the pathway to God, so I believe that the book of nature, with its astonishing details, the blade of grass or the resonance levels of the carbon atom, also suggest a God of purpose and a God of design. And I think my belief makes me no less of a scientist. Werner Heisenberg. The first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist. But at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. Anthony Hewish. The ghostly presence of virtual particles defies rational common sense and is non-intuitive for those unacquainted with physics. Religious belief in God and Christian belief that God became man around 2,000 years ago may to some people seem strange to common sense thinking. But when the most elementary physical things behave in this way, we should be prepared to accept that the deepest aspects of our existence go beyond our common sense intuitions. I believe in God. It makes no sense to me to assume that the universe and our existence is just a cosmic accident, that life emerged due to a random physical process in an environment which simply happened to have the right properties. As a Christian, I begin to comprehend what life is all about through a belief in a creator, some of whose nature was revealed by a man born around 2,000 years ago. Guglielmo Marconi. I am proud to be a Christian. I believe not only as a Christian, but as a scientist as well. A wireless device can deliver a message through the wilderness. In prayer, the human spirit can send invisible waves to eternity, waves that achieve their goal in front of God. Robert Andrews Millikan. This much I can say with definiteness, namely that there is no scientific basis for the denial of religion. Nor is there, in my judgment, any excuse for a conflict between science and religion, for their fields are entirely different. Men who know very little of science and men who know very little of religion do indeed get to quarreling, and the onlookers imagine that there is a conflict between science and religion, whereas the conflict is only between two different species of ignorance. Sir Isaac Newton. I have a fundamental belief in the Bible as the Word of God, written by those who were inspired. I study the Bible daily. William D. Phillips. I believe in God. In fact, I believe in a personal God who acts in and interacts with the creation. I believe that observations about the orderliness of the physical universe and the apparently exceptional fine-tuning of the conditions of the universe for the development of life suggest that an intelligent creator is responsible. I believe in God because of a personal faith, a faith that is consistent with what I know about science. And being an ordinary scientist and an ordinary Christian seems perfectly natural to me. It is also perfectly natural for the many scientists I know who are also people of deep religious faith. Sir Gillian T. Prance. For many years, I have believed that God is the great designer behind all nature. All my studies in science then have confirmed my faith. I regard the Bible as my principal source of authority. Colin Russell. The common belief that the actual relations between religion and science over the last few centuries have been marked by deep and enduring hostility is not only historically inaccurate, but actually a caricature so grotesque that what needs to be explained is how possibly it could have achieved any degree of respectability. Arthur Shadlow. Religion is founded on faith. It seems to me that when confronted with the marvels of life in the universe, one must ask why and not just how. The only possible answers are religious. For me, that means Protestant Christianity, to which I was introduced as a child and which has withstood the tests of a lifetime. But the context of religion is a great background for doing science. In the words of Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Thus, scientific research is a worshipful act, in that it reveals more of the wonders of God's creation. Frank Tipler. When I began my career as a cosmologist some 20 years ago, I was a convinced atheist. I would never in my wildest dreams have imagined that one day I would be writing a book purporting to show that the central claims of Judeo-Christian theology are in fact true, and that these claims are straightforward deductions of the laws of physics as we now understand them. I have been forced into these conclusions by the inexorable logic of my own special branch of physics. And from the perspective of the latest physical theories, Christianity is not a mere religion, but an experimentally testable science. James Tour. I build molecules for a living. I can't begin to tell you how difficult that job is. And I stand in awe of God because of what he has done through his creation. My faith has increased through my research. Only a rookie who knows nothing about science would say that science takes away from faith. If you really study science, it will bring you closer to God. Charles Towns. I strongly believe in the existence of God based on intuition, observations, logic, and also scientific knowledge. Science, with its experiments and logic, tries to understand the order or the structure of the universe. Religion, with its theological inspiration and reflection, tries to understand the purpose and meaning of the universe. These two are cross-related. Purpose implies structure, and structure ought somehow to be interpretable in terms of purpose. I'm a physicist. I also consider myself a Christian. As I try to understand the nature of our universe and these two modes of thinking, I see many commonalities and crossovers between science and religion. It seems logical to me that in the long run, these two will even converge. Finally, George Wald. When it comes to the origin of life, there are only two possibilities: creation or spontaneous generation. There is no third way. Spontaneous generation was disproved 100 years ago. But that leaves us to only one other conclusion, that of supernatural creation. We cannot accept that on philosophical grounds. Therefore, we choose to believe the impossible, that life arose spontaneously by chance. Now, the science of cosmology is currently in an uproar because of the discoveries from the James Webb Telescope that show remote galaxies as being more complex and developed than expected. Therefore, our current theories about the formation of galaxies and the expanding universe all have to be revised. The cosmos is complex beyond our understanding, and likewise, many of the questions we have about God may not be directly answerable. And you can see the paper Accuracy of the Bible and Questioning God. And this also doesn't mean that everyone who represents or tries to speak for God does so in his authority. And you can see the paper Criticism of the Church. Nevertheless, the Bible is our only source of truth on the ancient world, as well as for eternity and ultimate reality. And it explains that there is only one way that we can come to God. As Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And that's from John chapter 14. So the purpose of the Bible is to be a message from God about what God is like, what we should think and believe about him, how to approach him, that he loves us with an everlasting love, and perhaps, most important, to understand that our time on earth is like a flower, that we bloom for a while and then we die, but then how we can have an eternal destiny with God. If you like this channel, please click on the like and share buttons. If you want to see more videos from this channel, please click on the subscribe and notify buttons. Thanks for watching.